What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. We continue to look at which teams are maybe overrated and which teams are maybe underrated based off of their performance in one-possession games this past season. And this is something that we've done for several conferences now, and again, it's crazy to me how this is a great indication of how a team may perform the next year, whether it's going to be a team that gets better or a team that gets worse, at least record-wise, based off of these one-possession games. Because teams, and again, go back and watch the other conferences, teams that do really well in one-possession games one year usually don't do so well the next year. And I think this played out a decent amount in the Big 12. When you go back to 2019, the teams that were really good in the one-possession games, teams that were maybe overrated, maybe not, or maybe they were not as good as their record would indicate: Oklahoma, Baylor, Oklahoma State, and West Virginia. Oklahoma, a little bit of a step back this year. Baylor, a big step back. And then Oklahoma State and West Virginia really didn't change a whole lot. And then the teams that were underrated, teams that were maybe better than their record: TCU, Texas Tech, and Iowa State. Look at Iowa State, how much better they got this year because they played better in one-possession games. So it's been interesting to look at this. It doesn't tell the whole story, like I've said, but again, it does tell us maybe which teams were at least better or worse than their record would suggest from this past season. So let's start with the top 5 teams in the Big 12. Iowa State was 8-1, and we're only going by the conference record here just because it was a crazy year and some teams maybe didn't even play a non-conference game, and it's just I decided to just keep it all based off of the conference records. Oklahoma was 6-2, Oklahoma State was 6-3, Texas 5-3, West Virginia 4-4. How about in one-possession games? Iowa State, why did they get to the Big 12 championship game? Because they were 4-1 in one-possession games. And I think more than any other conference, when you look at the Big 12, there are a ton of one-possession games. And the same can be said about 2019. Go back to that year, there were a ton of one-possession games. This is a conference with a lot of parity. I know it feels like Oklahoma and maybe Texas is usually near the top. Oklahoma State, Iowa State, feels like these teams have kind of, Baylor did it in 2019. But there's a lot of parity, and this conference is very even. Any team can really surprise any year, in my opinion. But Iowa State 4-1 in one-possession games. They were really good in those one-possession games. Oklahoma was just 1-2. Oklahoma State was 3-2. Texas was 3-3. They were also 3-3 in 2019. The exact same record. That's been the difference for Texas. They've been right there. They've had close games. They've had opportunities. They just haven't been able to break through and win enough of these one-possession games. West Virginia was just 1-2 this year, so they didn't do quite as well. And again, it's a team that did really well in one-possession games the year before. Very interesting here. But Oklahoma State, I guess, was one team that played pretty well in the one-possession games each of the last 2 years. So Oklahoma State's had a winning record in these one-possession games each of the last 2 years. I think they're maybe the only team out of the Big 12 that you can say that about. So we're going to look at what could have been, what would have been the best case scenario if these teams had won all of their one-possession games. What type of season could they have had? Well, for Iowa State, they could have been 9-0. And again, this does not include the game to Louisiana. They would have lost that game anyways because it was not a one-possession game. Oklahoma could have been 8-0. Both of their losses came in one-possession games. Oklahoma State could have been 8-1. Texas could have been 8-0. Yes, all of their losses came in one-possession games. I know people thought I was crazy for picking Texas to make the college football playoff this year. If you win those close games, they would have had a chance, and it just didn't work out for them because, again, they lost 3 one-possession games. West Virginia could have been 6-2 if they had played better in their one-possession games. So you see here how easily this conference could have changed. Oklahoma State and Texas, either one of those teams could have made it into the Big 12 championship game. West Virginia even could have made it in if they had won those 2 one-possession games. So it could have been a much different story in the Big 12. But Iowa State was able to win those one-possession games. And then Oklahoma, they just got there because they didn't have a lot of one-possession games. They dominated most of their games, but those 2 losses did cost them a spot at a college football playoff. So let's go to how about the worst-case scenario? What if these teams had lost all of their one-possession games? Iowa State could have been 4-5 Could have been a much different year for the Cyclones. And that's really what happened to them in 2019. They lost a bunch of one-possession games. This year they won them. Not a good sign for next year. If that trend continues, then next year maybe they don't do as well in the one-possession games. Iowa State maybe drops off. Maybe Iowa State's a little bit overrated. The bowl game wouldn't really indicate that, and the fact that they took Oklahoma down to the wire in the Big 12 championship. But again, that's just what these numbers would suggest. Oklahoma could have been 5-3, could have been a little bit worse, not much. Oklahoma State could have been 3-6. Texas could have been 2-6. West Virginia could have been 3-5. So if you split those one-possession games, this is how it would have went. Iowa State would have been 6-2 and 2.5. Oklahoma actually would have had the best record. Oklahoma would have been number one if all of these teams split their one-possession games. They did ultimately win the Big 12 championship, so maybe there's something to this. Oklahoma State would have been 5.5, 3.5. Texas still would have been 5-3. West Virginia wouldn't have changed much. So when you look at these top teams, again, we're looking for a 2-point differential in the wins and losses in the one-possession games. We only see that with one team here, and that's Iowa State. Iowa State, based off of these numbers, was actually overrated. And I've heard a lot of people in different comments on different videos saying that that Iowa State was overrated this year. Maybe they were right. I don't really agree with that. I think this is a good team, and I think they have a lot coming back. And I don't know that they drop off next year, but the numbers would tell you that maybe that's going to happen. So Iowa State, maybe the one team that was a little bit overrated in the Big 12, at least from the top 5 teams. Let's go to the next 5 teams. TCU was 5-4, Kansas State 4-5, Texas Tech 3-6, Baylor 2-7, and Kansas 0-8. How do these teams do in one-possession games? Again, Baylor would be the one team where you see a 2-point differential, a 2-number differential there in the wins and losses. TCU 2-2, Kansas State 2-2. They split. Texas Tech 3-2. But Baylor 1-3. They did not perform well in one-possession games, and they had opportunities to have a much better season if they had won these close games, something that they did in 2019. It's almost a complete reversal with Iowa State and Baylor. Baylor, great in one-possession games in 2019, not great in 2020. Iowa State, not great in 2019, really good in 2020. And that's the difference in finishing at the top of the Big 12 and finishing at the bottom of the Big 12. You got to win these close games. Kansas only had one-possession game, and they lost it. Obviously, Kansas is terrible, though. If they had won all their one-possession games, TCU could have been 7-2. Kansas State could have been 6-3. Texas Tech 5-4. And again, Baylor could have been 5-4. So all the way from 2-7 up to 5-4 if they win those 3 games that they lost by one possession. Kansas could have been 1-7. Really not much better there. So how about the worst case scenario for these teams? What if they had lost all of their one-possession games? TCU would have been 3-6. Kansas State 2-7. Texas Tech could have been 0-9. Every win for them in the Big 12 was a one-possession win, a one-possession game. And also their non-conference game was a one-possession game too. I think Houston Baptist. So it was maybe Texas Tech was lucky. Maybe they were lucky this year just to get to 3-6. But again, they did lose a couple of one-possession games as well, so it kind of plays out both ways. Baylor could have been 1-8. Kansas could have been 0-8, which they were. So how about if these teams split their one-possession games? TCU still would have been 5-4. Kansas State still would have been 4-5. Texas Tech 2-7, 3-6, somewhere in there. But Baylor is the team that actually would have been a little bit better, would have been ahead of Texas Tech. They would have been 3-6, and Kansas would have been pretty much the same. So when we look at the big picture of the Big 12, the team that was really good in one-possession games and potentially overrated, Iowa State. The team that was not good in one-possession games and potentially underrated was Baylor. We will see if that trend continues into 2021. Will Baylor be much improved? Will Iowa State be much worse? Something to watch. And again, it has played out this way with every single team we have done except for Indiana. Indiana has been the one exception, and we've done the SEC, the ACC, the Big 10, and now the Big 12. Can Iowa State maybe be that exception this year? Can Iowa State maybe have another great year and be successful once again in one-possession games? Or maybe they'll be so good that they don't have a lot of one-possession games. That would be interesting as well. But we're not going to do the Pac-12. This is the final conference. The Pac-12 just didn't play a lot of games, so I didn't feel like there was really any point in doing Pac-12. Plus, nobody or hardly anyone watches Pac-12 videos anyways, which normally we do all the conferences, but again, since they didn't play that many games, that's going to do it for the Big 12. I would love to get your thoughts on this down in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more here on the SG1 Sports College Football Channel.